Tēnā tātou, no mai haere mai. Welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us for Cambridge Chats today in the beautiful Christchurch Botanic Gardens. I'm Janaea Clark, Financial Wellbeing Champion and Head of Marketing for Cambridge Partners. Today we're going to be talking about sustainability and investing in a way that aligns with your own values. So today we've got a wonderful lineup of speakers here today. And sustainability really has become a real focus. We've, had a bit of a shift in our focus because climate change is really upon us. 83% of us believe that climate change is actually real. 72% are prepared to change our behaviour, but there's more than half of us that actually don't know where to start. So today our goal is to leave you a little bit inspired. Our speakers will be talking about ways that they're making changes in sustainability and what they're seeing in the industry as well. We hope that you can leave with a few key takeaways to start your own investment journey to sustainability if you haven't started that already. So Aotearoa, New Zealand is a clean, green country, but there's still a lot of work to do. 50% of our greenhouse gas emissions come from agriculture. So that's livestock, methane gas. 40% comes from the creation of energy. And that's in the industrial and commercial sectors. That's broken down into 17%, which comes from transport. So that's our planes, trains, automobiles. 12% comes from our workplaces. 6% is related to electricity generation across the grid, and 2% comes from electricity generated from our homes. 6% comes from non-energy emissions, so that's metals, minerals, and chemicals. And we've got 4% that relates to waste emissions. So we're doing quite a good job in recycling, which is excellent. But for those 17% of people that still don't believe climate change is an issue, you just have to look at our weather patterns. Saturday was a prime example of how bad the weather can be, but fires, floods, droughts, ski fields not being able to open because the temperatures are too high. Government regulations can make a big shift, and we have seen that happen when they banned single-use plastic bags. Banks are also getting behind businesses so they can achieve their sustainability goals. They're making lending a lot easier, giving them discounts. As a consumer, you can also have the power to make a difference by the companies that you invest in or your own purchasing habits. Investing for financial gain and doing good for the planet doesn't have to be a mutually exclusive concept. So today on our panel, we're very privileged to have Dr. Roger Robson-Williams. He's the Chief Sustainability Officer at Plant and Food Research. He'll discuss what sustainability is and some of the key opportunities and challenges we face. He'll also provide insights into initiatives that Plant and Food Research are doing and the decisions consumers can make to be more sustainable. Phillip Roth, Advisory Partner at BDO. Phillip's discussion will cover the growing significance of sustainability for businesses. He'll talk about the evolving needs of his clients and how they're incorporating sustainability into their decision-making process. Dominic, Sheehan, Financial Advisor and Head of Sustainability for Cambridge Partners. Dom will be discussing what sustainable investing means and introduce some key terms and concepts, including options for investors. He'll talk about some challenges and investigate the trade-off between targeting a social return versus a financial return. So just a bit of housekeeping. Bathrooms, you can make your way out either of these doors and turn left, and it's past the cafe on the left. In the unlikely event of an emergency, the two exits are here and here, and the staff will take over and tell you what to do, so just follow their instructions. As a note, a disclaimer, please note that the opinions of our speakers today are their own. We're giving general information, which doesn't consider your personal situation, so please don't regard this as personalised financial advice. And any discussion on past performance cannot guarantee any future returns, but you're welcome to stay afterwards. Our advisors will be around if you want to have a chat. But I'd like to start and introduce our first speaker, Dr. Roger Robson-Williams, Chief Sustainability Officer at Plant and Food Research. Roger leads the sustainability agenda at the New Zealand Institute for Plant and Food Research and is responsible for working with anyone and everyone across the organisation and beyond to make it a more sustainable, future-fit provider of great science. Roger moved to New Zealand in 2012 to join the Foundation for Arable Research as Director of Research Development. While there, he developed a keen interest in sustainability issues, and particularly in the impacts of primary production on the environment. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Roger Robson-Williams.
Thank you very much for that introduction. I'm always a bit nervous about having a round of applause before I've said anything, and I was really properly delighted to be invited to come and talk here this afternoon because sustainability is a passion of mine. Obviously, the job title suggests that, but also I'm really interested in learning more, and I think and hope that I'm going to learn a lot from this afternoon. So. My job is to kind of set the scene, help everybody transition from whatever busy mornings you've had to the conversation we're now about to have. And the way I wanted to do that to start off with was just introduce this book, The Limits to Growth. This is a priceless little book that was written when I was 5 years old in 1972 it was published. And it was a young group of scientists in the States that basically said, we need to have a bit of a look at the level of consumption of all sorts of resources across the planet, energy, minerals, and the accumulation of pollution and toxins and greenhouse gases that are arising from the way we're behaving as a species. And it was an extremely controversial book at the time because basically they said, we are pretty quickly going to start to A, run out of critical resources, and B, accumulate these pollutants and greenhouse gases to a level that starts to really impact on the natural environment and on human health. And nobody really wanted to hear that. And in many ways, nobody still really wants to hear it. And one of the slightly sobering things, and I will lighten up after this, but one of the slightly sobering things about this book is that A, they were right, and B, in the intervening 50 years, we've done very little to address many of the challenges that they highlighted in that book. The science has obviously developed since 1972, and we now talk a lot about what are referred to as planetary boundaries. Now, there are 9 planetary boundaries which just represent the life support systems on Earth. So the atmosphere is one, the oceans are another. We talk about the flow of nutrients, so this is particularly important in agriculture. We talk about the flow of nitrogen and phosphorus. And ozone depletion, obviously something very pertinent to New Zealand. That's another one of these life-supporting systems, the ozone layer, and obviously we think about the impacts that humans have had on that. So there are 9 of these boundaries. And collectively, they define, if you like, the ecological ceiling that we need to operate within. And if we go too far in any of these planetary boundaries, if we exceed the safe limits, we run the risk of getting to tipping points where, for example, climate change gets out of control, biodiversity loss, the extinction of species becomes more and more rapid, and so on and so forth. So those planetary boundaries, they give us an outer ecological ceiling, and we need to operate as a species within those. Just as a side note, we're in a, if you like, a geological epoch now that's referred to as the Anthropocene. And what that means is we're in a period of geology where humans have the capacity, and indeed are, influencing the shape of the entire planet. So that's scary, but it's also really empowering. So if we make the right decisions, we can actually change things for the better. We really can be in control of this. So planetary boundaries, ecological ceiling to human activity. Sustainability isn't just about the environment, though. It's not just about planetary boundaries. It's an awful lot about people, about society, about communities. And so when you think about the social dimensions of sustainability, there's an academic in the UK called Kate Rayworth, who's done a lot of work on this. And she said, a bit like you've got the planetary boundaries defining this outer ring, you've got a kind of an inner ring, a social foundation below which people don't have access, for example, to adequate education, or there's great inequality or inequity in their lives, or they haven't got access to healthcare. So there's a kind of social foundation above which humans kind of have the right to be living, enough food, good education, opportunities, and so on. And so she's created this concept of donut economics, where the inner ring is this social foundation that everybody needs to be able to be living above. And then the outer ring are defined by those planetary boundaries, and we need to be operating within them. And so the safe space for humanity is between those two rings. And she's defined that in this concept of donut economics, which I think can be quite a useful visual kind of tool just to imagine those two limits. So for me anyway, sustainability is about operating between those two things, really cognizant of the social dimensions of sustainability. And climate change, Janae's already mentioned this, it's obviously a big one. We've just had COP27. But just to be clear, that's not the only significant challenge we face. And I've just come back from some meetings with sustainability professionals in other countries. And the next big thing is going to be biodiversity. And in the same way that we're seeing companies being held account at the moment for the impact they have on greenhouse gas emissions and climate change, we're going to be seeing exactly the same thing, but with a broader look at the impact they're having on nature, and in particular the loss of species and the loss of functional environments. So that's just a look out. Janae also mentioned the importance of individual action, regulation, good decision making, and I just want to talk very briefly. And how am I doing for time? I'm okay. Good. Just talk very briefly about what plant and food research is doing. And I think there are some really interesting parallels between the organisation I work for and Cambridge Partners, in fact. Because plant and food research, we do science to support the kiwi fruit industry and the wine industry and the arable industry to grow more from less, to do that as sustainably as possible, to get really good quality produce to markets, reduce waste and so on. And that's where we can have the big kind of global impact on sustainability. But we also need to pay attention to our own operational sustainability. There's a kind of emperor's new clothes thing going on here. So we need to be able to make sure that we're kind of walking the talk ourselves. And so obviously, like a lot of other organisations, we're doing our carbon accounting, and we're looking to put together an emissions reduction plan and all those good things. But we've also adopted a much kind of broader framework that looks at a whole range of sustainability metrics, including social ones. And we're using that. It's called, rather inelegantly, the Future Fit Business Benchmark. And it's just a benchmarking tool to help organisations really understand how they're performing across a whole range of dimensions of sustainability. And one of the things that's a bit unique about it, instead of comparing yourself to other similar organisations or looking to see if you've done a little bit better than you did last year, it actually sets a kind of line in the sand below which you're actually doing harm. And so you really need to be moving yourself to be above that line. But anyway, the key point really is that organisations like my science organisation, like Cambridge Partners, really need to attend to their own sustainability, but that isn't where we're going to change the world. And the way Cambridge Partners can potentially help change the world is by helping you, good folks, make great investment decisions. So that's just a comparison of those two organisations. And just on a personal level, my wife and I, we live up in Oxford. We've got a lifestyle block. My wife's very green-fingered. We grow a lot of our own food. We drive an EV. We've got solar panels. We're very conscious about what we buy, trying not to buy too much stuff, because buying stuff is the problem. It's not actually to be honest, economic growth per se isn't the problem. It's the growth in consumption of finite resources that's the problem. And I'd say that not to put myself on a pedestal, but just to come back to that point that individual actions and individual decisions day by day make a difference. It all stacks up. Right. So the last thing I wanted to do was wrap up with another book, a much more recent book, which I think is a real gem. And if you are going to go on summer holidays or anything and you want a good book to read or to listen to on Audible, Prosperity Without Growth by Tim Jackson. I really commend it to you because it covers a lot of what I've very briefly covered this afternoon, but in much more detail. And it really challenges the economic growth paradigm. It explores consumption patterns right through to the psychology of human behavior and why it is we're driven to want so much stuff, and why, as people become more and more affluent, their tendency is just to buy more stuff, which is the unsustainable bit. And it's very accessible, very, in my view, interesting, and I'd really commend it to you. Prosperity Without Growth by Tim Jackson. And of course, everyone should have a copy of this.
Awesome, thank you. Thanks so much, Roger. Our next speaker is Phillip Roth, Advisory Partner at BDO. Phillip's expertise is in business development for both commercial and not-for-profit enterprises. This includes quality governance and decision-making, facilitated strategy and growth planning, business appraisals, advisory boards, and general business advice and support. Phillip is also actively invested with a number of Māori businesses in the Canterbury West Coast regions through the Māori Business Facilitation Service operated under Te Puni Kōkiri. Please welcome Phillip Roth.
Tēnā koutou katoa, ngā mihi mahana kia koutou, ko Phillip Roth ahau. It's actually really exciting to have so many people interested in today's topic. I'll just introduce Zane, who's my colleague, hand show there. This is something that is really, really important in terms of what's happening. And Roger, just taking a leaf out of your book there, and you mentioned too, it's a topic that is just not going to go away. It's absolutely part of our conversations literally every single day. By the way, if you were 5 when that book came out, I was 2. So we could work our ages out backwards. I thought that was quite good, but I wouldn't want to have a read of that book, if that's okay. Not that giving ages away is that big a deal. Just really briefly for about 10 minutes, Zane and I actually worked these notes together because it's so hot off the press in terms of what we've been working through as a business at BDO. So for our sins, we're chartered accountants, but apparently we have okay personalities. We focused on getting our footprint right as a business, and that's something you mentioned as well, Roger, and I'm sure, Dom, you'll say the same thing. So actually just last week, but it's going to be signed off shortly, we thought there's no point I cannot stand here unless we actually measure our own carbon footprint. Why? Because increasingly in some of the requests for proposals and the pitches and the mergers and acquisition projects, we're being asked, well, have you measured your carbon footprint? And it's actually being stated in black and white that we need to provide that. So we felt to do that. It's not been a straightforward exercise. It's taken weeks and weeks and months, but we've finally got there. And I want to be really clear, it's not just about ticking the box. We actually have to do something with that carbon assessment and decide where we take it forward. So BDO globally, we're quite a family type business, so we are independently owned. So I'm an owner and director of our local practice in Christchurch. But from a global level, it's been really pushed hard from Belgium and, of all places, Ukraine. The Ukrainians have been, in spite of what's happening over there, it's quite incredible. They're some of the leaders in Europe around the whole, I'll call it social sustainability impact reporting that happens. On that reporting side, and you talked about carbon reporting, it's an area that even with your own investments and the things that I invest in as well, all of a sudden we're going to see a dearth of information come out. We'll go, what on earth am I reading here? And it's through a thing called International Financial Reporting Standards. For some of us in the room, that would put us to sleep, but it's actually going to be right up here in terms of significance. So it's going to be auditors will be looking at it, investment appraisers will be looking at it, you'll be looking at it, you'll be getting advice around it, so it becomes absolutely paramount. Locally, led by Zane, we wanted to do some practical things. For example, we went away from your typical milk plastic bottles and we've ended up using big canisters. What do we call it again? Milk kegs. That's the one. I wanted him to say the keg. It's not the other sort of keg. That's for after 5 o'clock. So it's all sustainable beer and milk. But it's actually been a huge hit with the team because it's just a completely different way. You basically pour it like a handle. So it has a bit of a quirky factor to it. All our rubbish, absolutely everything, either gets recycled, reconstituted, and actually our rubbish to tip is very, very minimal now. And you might say, is that a big deal for us? It's actually a really big deal. We've got 160 staff now, and a lot of our younger staff, but not exclusively so, people are making employment decisions based on what your actual sustainability policy looks like. I thought that was not a big deal until I realised what a big deal it is. And some of my staff that we've got now, including our interns, actually said, I chose you guys primarily because you guys have a really workable, pragmatic sustainability policy. On the other side of that, I do want to say, and it's come out already, there's no way in business we can do sustainability without economic, financial sustainability. And I'm a real big advocate that we can almost get mesmerised, and I don't think this will be in contradiction to anything. We've got to be careful. I've actually seen businesses and organisations go so far to the left, they've forgotten about actually paying the bills and making sure that the fundamentals of business are ticking over. So that's just something to keep an eye out for. So that was just a quick coverage of some of the focus areas. So nationally, I'm involved with a group, a governance group, which is our ESG group. Now, for a lot of you in the room, you may have heard of the acronym, but I think it's important to restate what it is. It stands for Environmental, Social and Governance Focus. It's not purely just sustainability because it has a lot of depth to it and it goes far and wide. And what's been exciting about it is whilst we have the environmental component, which is absolutely critical, it really becomes a little bit redundant if you don't have the social, community, relational piece and also the governance and oversight, which has been brought out today as well. You'll hear ESG mentioned more and more as we go forward, almost to the point of, oh, there goes that ESG again. But the reality is it is an important acronym that defines a lot of focus for us. Look, just to finish off, I'm going to rattle through, I've just picked 5 real quick vignettes of just a few boards that I chair where we've had investment and opportunistic things that are very closely related to this ESG sustainability profile. So first one I'm going to start off with is actually a trucking company, Steve Murphy Limited. You may have seen their trucks or our trucks driving around, particularly North Canterbury. We have 50 trucks. Our HPMV or high performance vehicles can cart as much in total gross laden weight of 58 tonnes. And you'll see the big H signs on the trucks. That's a fair amount of inertia, folks. When you're dealing with trucks, we can't just turn the switch off and go, let's go electric, because there is nothing that we could use. We're driving trucks through rivers, through sustainable farmlands. We've got to get these logs out somewhere too. And you might have picked, there's been a reasonable building boom of late. We literally can't keep up with local demand at the moment. So even for us strategically as a board, we are still actively looking at where hydrogen vehicles will eventually go. Places like the UK have been incredibly clever about building, I call it infrastructure and trucking infrastructure, where they're actually already using hydrogen technology. The issue is, if you want to start, you'll pay 3 times the input price for the capital gear. So you've got a practical reality there, so you can't just rush in. But what we've decided to do is make sure that we make a start and we make a commitment. That's the first thing. Second thing is electric trucks. And actually many have tried and failed on the electric truck side. It's really, really tough. I'm not sure for those that have an EV, they have incredible torque. You can literally fly from zero. It's just not that simple when you're carting 58 tonnes, because that has consequences if you're on the tarmac, if you can imagine. So it's, even if we could use an electric truck, would our infrastructure in New Zealand even cope with it? The answer is not currently. In the States, on a lot of the mid-wet, I've actually seen trucks over there when I was over there in 2019. It's quite remarkable seeing these electric trucks. They work when they are flat, long-haul lines, when they can recharge on their rest breaks and they continue. So that's actually working quite well. So watch the space on that one. And just to finish on that first one, from a sustainability point of view, interestingly, one of our biggest opportunities is not the log itself, but it's actually it's what we call the hog fuel or the stumpage in the forest, which now needs to be aggregated and used. So from a biofuel point of view, it's an incredible opportunity. If you think of the likes of Fonterra and a lot of the bigger emitters, who would argue that they are big emitters, they are absolutely moving away from coal. So having a sustainable, renewable resource using forest material makes a lot of sense, but getting the supply chain for that's the challenge. Second quick example is, you may or may not have heard of Kairos Food Rescue. They're here in Christchurch. Recently went on the board as the chair. Effectively repurposing food that ordinarily would go straight to tip. You're talking here really good food at cafes and restaurants and supermarkets. And we're talking, initially I thought, oh, okay, there might be a few tonnes. Yesterday in our board report, for the last 300 days on average, there was a tonne of food that was repurposed. So that's 300 tonnes within a working year, which actually blew me away, and actually was quite a heartfelt moment. Because what that does is serve about 200 very needy people that really do appreciate that, because you can understand from an ESG point of view, that's 300 tonnes of food that ordinarily would go to tip. And you imagine how much other food like that. So the food wastage thing, or business generally, is absolutely huge. Another one I want to mention, and they won't mind this, doing a little bit of work with Roth Foundation, which I'm sure a lot of us know about. Roth actually have a pool of capital potentially available where they're starting to look to co-invest in businesses that are not just purely commercial. So they're looking for impact measures that are both social and economic. And I think that's a very smart, exciting move for the future. So now you're starting to see that, I'll call it that charitable, not-for-loss sector, really making a push into the investment equity space, which I think is something we all need to think about, because it certainly encourages me. Just to finish off, has anyone heard of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals? Maybe Google them, actually. Yeah. Oh, look, I did bring them along. I can chat to you at the end. But what we've done is, as a business, we've actually codified our ESG strategy. So we just signed this off a month ago. We actually lined it up and deliberately went through, and maybe just Google up STGs, United Nations, and it'll come up with a whole series of icons. And the majority of those are around ESG measures and focuses. And it's actually a very powerful tool. I'd encourage you to have a look. It's real easy read stuff, and it has a whole lot of tooling there as well. Secondly, as part of that strategy, we just last week signed off on our updated values. You probably can't see that, but the one in the middle says make sustainable decisions. And we've actually made that the centre of what we do. I'm not cheating. We truly did put that at the centre because we think that's that important. Last two, Channel Islands. So working with Hokatihi Moriori, the trust over there, they are a fascinating trust to work with in the sense that they're isolated. It's a long way over there. But investing in things like renewable resources, sustainability is now top of their agenda. They have a huge commercial quota component. They have a major farm over there. I go over there a couple of times every year. My staff are a bit jealous that I go, but it is really hard work, if you get my drift. The locals are very hospitable. But really interesting around planting trees that are sustainable, native, with a mix of exotics, but not at the expense of the entire farm. So there's a really, really smart model in terms of how that works. And last but not least, has anybody been to Opuki Methven Pools? Did you enjoy it? Did you notice all the sunlight screens on the left-hand side as you went in? So that's all, yeah, as you were sitting in the pools, and you probably went to the adults pool, did you? And I'm putting a plug out there. It's quite nice when you have a tray of drinks and food float past. But you wouldn't notice, so there's incredible power from the sun that's being harnessed, and it's not solar power, it's actually solar heating. And it's, if you ever get a chance, seriously, go out there. It's quite amazing. And in weather like this, there is no requirement to work off the grid because there's so much power being harnessed by the sun. You'll notice that these huge solar farms are becoming in vogue, and I'll guarantee it'll become a hot potato because it'll be, oh, we're using all that land for solar farms. But this is where the world is going. You'll be aware the biggest solar farm in the Southern Hemisphere is going to be here in Canterbury. It's just incredible, the rate of change. And I look at it, I used to be so sceptical, but now I've decided it's better to run with than run against. But still be sensible, still be commercial. So look, I hope that helps. I wanted to give you sort of some commercial, less commercial examples. If you want to have a chat or anything, and I can show you those STGs, come up and have a chat with me at the end. But thanks for your time.
Thanks, Phillip. Our next speaker is Dominic Sheehan. He's a financial advisor and head of sustainability at Cambridge Partners. He's leading the development and execution of our roadmap to improve the impact that our business has on the environment and society. He also contributes to the development of our sustainable investment solutions and is a thought leader in sustainable investment advice and how we can incorporate values into our investments. Please welcome Dom.
Kia ora, guys. The other day, I was sitting on my couch at home with my wife and our 2-year-old son, and we were watching a movie called The Lorax. It's based on a Dr. Seuss book. Some of you are familiar with it, I see. In this story, a 12-year-old boy called Ted Wiggins lives in a seemingly perfect town called Thneedville. Now, in Thneedville, there's no dirt or animals or wildlife or trees. Everything's plastic, everything's clean, and the people there believe that this is the best way of living. You know, it's safer. We're not going to get dirty. We can buy fresh bottled air. It's just the best way to live. But Ted, our little hero, he becomes infatuated with a girl, and that girl dreams of and longs for real trees. And so this motivates Ted to go outside of the city limits. And when Ted does go outside of the city walls, he finds that the natural world outside has been decimated by industry. An entrepreneur called the Onceler has cut down and harvested every single tree. And what was once a beautiful oasis teeming with life and activity and joy in nature has been reduced to rubble. Now, the Lorax is just a children's book, but it explores a narrative of innovation, industrialization, industrial damage, and then regeneration. As a financial advisor, I'm passionate about innovation and industrialization. But as a human and a father, I'm passionate about decency and responsibility, and I don't want to leave the world in a worse place than how I found it. So sustainable investing is an important topic for all of us. Now, the objective of my chat today is to share a little bit about what I've learned. Specifically, I'll try and talk through what is sustainable investing, how can it drive good in the world, and the question around, can we expect the returns to be better or worse? So first to our question on what sustainable investing is. If you open up an investment newsletter or website, you might be overwhelmed by different terms and jargon that comes out regarding sustainable investing. It's a really hot topic and the marketers have definitely latched onto it. To avoid bogging us down in the detail around some of that, I'll try and explain it as a bit of a continuum, from one end to the other. At one end, and we'll call this the light green end of the scale, there are broadly conventional investment solutions. Funds or portfolios is what I mean when I say investment solutions. Most of the effort in designing these solutions has gone into trying to achieve the best risk-return trade-off, so more profit for less risk, which is what most investors are looking for. Now, at the other end of the scale, we can call this the dark green end of the scale, there's philanthropic endeavours, investments where the investor will want some return, but that's not their primary objective. Their primary objective is to do something good in the world. And then there's obviously everything in between. So starting at the light green end of the scale, the most common terms you will come across, as Phillip mentioned, is ESG being one of them, environmental, social and governance, and another common term is socially responsible investing, or SRI. Now, there are differences between these two terms, but there's no consistent globally adopted standard or definition around what they specifically mean. The industry is still maturing in that regards, and Phillip mentioned there's some standards starting to be developed in regards to reporting on sustainability, but there's still a lot of ambiguity out there. And while some socially responsible investment managers put a lot of care and thought into determining, how their investments can help the world to do good, many others will just slap on a label without much thought or foresight. It's something that you might hear called greenwashing. In my opinion, the most important part is what the investment managers, whether that be a financial advisor or a fund manager or a KiwiSaver manager, the most important bit is what they're actually doing, how they design the investment solution and how they're managing it. I call this the approach. There are three broad approaches you can take to achieving a sustainability objective through your investments. You could start as punish companies that underperform in regards to sustainability, or you could reward companies that outperform in regards to sustainability, or you can work with companies to try and help them be more sustainable. Starting with that first example, punishing underperforming companies, the most common way that you do that is to just exclude them from your investment. An example could be cutting BP out of a portfolio of international shares because you're concerned about the impact that the extraction and distribution of oil has on climate change. So let's remove them. That's one way you can do it. Conversely, rewarding companies that are doing good from a sustainability standpoint, one way that you could do that is by increasing an otherwise small investment, perhaps in Allbirds, the shoe company, because you like their commitment that they've made to minimizing their impact on climate change. The third approach that I mentioned, working with companies, commonly involves using your right to vote as a shareholder to try and drive change in that company. For example, this could be choosing to vote in a director who's got a proven track record of driving a positive sustainability agenda through the business, Or it could be a bit more at the intense end of the scale, where you might actually be voting on a shareholder action to try and force the company to perhaps adopt a policy in which they're going to be measuring their emissions, or adopt a policy in which they're going to be providing a living wage to all of their employees. This is a bit of a tricky area for many investors, especially if you invest through a fund like your KiwiSaver or an investment fund, because quite often those fund managers will take on the ability to act on behalf of their shareholder and cast that vote for them. So if you are going through an investment manager, you'll need to make sure that they've documented and explained what their approach is going to be to voting on these sustainability issues. Ideally, you're going to want to see a track record of them doing what they say they're going to do. The other way that you could do it, if you wanted to, is you could buy those shares or bonds directly yourself. I suppose shares if we're talking about voting. But then you're going to have to go ahead and front up to the annual general meeting of that company, and you're going to have to cast your votes. Now, that's the light green end of the scale. We're going to move back up to the dark green end of the scale now. And Phillip mentioned impact investing, and this is definitely one of those areas which sits up that end. Typically, you do want a bit of financial return, but the reason why you invest in a particular company or initiative is because you like what they're saying they're going to do and you want to support them. A classic example would be if you wanted to help promote the availability of clean drinking water. You might invest in a company that's building wells or water infrastructure in a part of Africa which is struggling to get access to clean drinking water. So that's a little bit about what sustainable investing is. And now, sticking with our continuum of sustainable investment options, let's discuss the good that you can do through sustainable investment. As we know, there are different ways of investing sustainably, and these different ways can impact the world differently. The first two approaches we discussed, punishing bad companies, rewarding good companies, they aim to deliver value by increasing the cost of raising money for underperforming companies and reducing the cost of raising money for performing companies. Holistically, this makes sense. If you were to invest in a more sustainable company, there should be greater demand for those shares, and as such, it should be cheaper for that company to raise more money. On the other side, if less people invest in unsustainable companies, like the Once-Liz company and the Lorex, there should be less demand for their shares or bonds. As such, it should be more expensive for them to raise money. Because companies like to raise money as cheaply as possible, this is an incentive for them to clean up their act. Academics have started researching how effective this is, and the results are a mixed bag. Some studies show it has a measurable impact, but others show it does not. So these approaches can make sense conceptually, but it may be some time until the evidence is clear on how much change they can actually deliver. It's a bit easier to quantify that third approach I mentioned around engaging with the company and trying to get them to change their ways. If a group of investors gets together, tries to force the board of a company to make a change, the outcome is easy to measure. Either it happens or it doesn't. So sustainable investing can drive change either by incentivizing businesses to be more sustainable or forcing businesses to be more sustainable. Not all sustainable investment solutions are the same, and some are likely to be more effective than others. Now to our final question on, will financial returns be better or worse? I have two quotes for you on this topic. The first is from Financial Times editor James Ning, who wrote, "The outperformance of ESG strategies is beyond doubt." So he was pretty confident that sustainable investments would perform better. The second quote is from author and Bloomberg Markets commentator Jared Dillon, who wrote, "ESG investing looks like just another stock bubble." So he was pretty confident that they wouldn't outperform in the long term. As you can see, not a clear consensus. The reality is, it's not fair to group together sustainable investments in one box and not sustainable investments in another. Different managers take different approaches to sustainable investing, and different investors have different objectives. Some sustainable investors will outperform traditional investors. Some traditional investors will outperform sustainable investors. It just depends on the actual investments that they hold. James Ning's comment is based on evidence that in the years leading up to 2022, many sustainable investments outperformed their traditional counterparts. This is partly because as more investors chose to invest sustainably, there was more demand for sustainable investments, and this drove up their price. Also, technology companies that are often featured quite heavily in sustainable investment portfolios had a great run leading up to 2022, and oil and gas companies returned comparatively poor results. 2022, however, has seen a reversal of this trend. Technology companies have had a pretty rubbish year. Oil and gas companies have had a comparatively great year. This performance isn't necessarily due to sustainability, it's due to other larger market forces. I think the best approach is to incorporate your values into the decision-making process. When trying to make an investment decision, most people will already think about how much risk can I afford to take on and how much return do I need to target in order to achieve what I'm trying to achieve. I see sustainability as just being a third factor in that equation. Pause and think, what are my values? What do I care about? And how could I incorporate them into my investments? If you do not choose to apply sustainability filters to your investments, that's totally fine. It's a personal preference. If you're in a financial position whereby you don't need to target a high return and you can actually go more at that dark green end of the scale and focus on trying to achieve a sustainability objective, that's great. And if you're like most of us and you're somewhere in the middle where you have your values and you want to incorporate them into your investments, but at the same time you need to make sure that you get a decent return to live the life that you want to live and need to live, then that's fine. We can try and find a point at that lighter green end of the scale. There might be some compromise with that, but we can work through it. Hopefully the return will be just as good doing it that way, but other economic drivers are probably going to be larger than the simple fact that it's a sustainable investment. So going back to Thneedville where we left Ted, Ted did actually find a seed for a real tree and he brought it home to plant it. But when he returned home, O'Hare, the local business magnate who profited off the plastic world, tried to stop him. Planting the seed could start a movement that would ultimately lead to environmental regeneration. We can't all be like Ted. We are just normal people going about our lives muddling through. And to be fair, if it all stopped with Ted planting that one seed, no meaningful change would have come to Thneedville. The real change came when people recognised that there was value in protecting the environment and standing up to O'Hare. If you choose to invest your money in a sustainable investment strategy, that one action probably won't solve world hunger or end climate change, but it is a small step in the right direction. I just hope that when someone tries to plant a seed, instead of fighting with them, we help out where we can, we water the seed, we protect it from O'Hare, and we let the tree grow. Thank you.
Thanks, Dom. Okay, we're just going to have a little change in seating and set up for our Q&A. So we encourage everyone's questions today, but just remember we can't give any personalised financial advice. So if you've got any personalised financial advice questions, you can ask one of our advisors later. I thought I'd just... Oh, what time have we got? Hang on. Oh, we've got a bit of time. We'll have you all out of here before 1:30. So I'm just going to kick off with a couple of questions. So one question for each of our panellists. But I think one of the key things that came through everybody's speeches was that people are the most important factor for making change, and especially making change through businesses as well. So, Dom, I think this question is for you because Roger and Phillip also spoke about the work that businesses need to do to start in their sustainability practices throughout their business. So can you just give us a little bit of an idea of what Cambridge Partners are doing in sustainability?
Yeah, absolutely. So Cambridge Partners, like a lot of people and a lot of organisations, are effectively at the beginning of this journey. We've recognised the need and we've started to take steps. So last year we put together a plan, a strategic document on what we're going to achieve. And to be fair, it's very similar to some of the initiatives that you've both talked about. We're currently in the process, and Christine is the superstar of this project who's here, of measuring, auditing, offsetting and reducing our emissions. We're doing that with an organisation called Toitu EnviroCare, which is a subsidiary of Landcare and Research. They basically come into your business and teach you how to measure your emissions. We've also, as you mentioned, adopted the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, and we've gone through an exercise of working out which ones apply to our business and how can we incorporate them. And then the third area that we're focusing on is the sustainable investment solution piece. I tried to allude to the fact that there's a bit of a spectrum there. There's no one case fits all, and you do need to put a bit of thought into it to actually achieve an objective, but also get a decent result, financial result. So that's an area that we're actively working through as well.
Thank you. Roger, this is a question for you. What are you seeing that gives you cause to see hope in sustainability?
Thanks for that. Yeah, I mean, remaining hopeful is important. People that feel hopeless are unempowered, and it is quite easy to get into quite a dark place with some of these sustainability issues because the consequences for society can be quite severe. But the fact that we've got a room full of people here this afternoon gives me hope that you're interested enough to turn out and hear these talks and have this discussion. I've just come back from the UK visiting my father, and since the last time I was there, it's extraordinary, the expansion of rooftop solar energy, which is great, microgeneration. And the UK has actually had several days in the last couple of years where their entire energy, 100%, has been generated renewably. Now, that's only odd days here and there, but given that we're talking, you know, Britain invented the Industrial Revolution and burning coal for power, this is an amazing turnaround. And then, you know, you can see that well-conceived regulation like getting rid of plastic bags, the sky hasn't fallen in, people cope. And so there's lots of reason to be hopeful. And I come back to this rather inelegant word, the Anthropocene, the idea that we're going through a geological epoch that is mostly shaped by mankind, not by glaciers or any of those other things. And that in itself says that we have the power to make the difference. So those things make me hopeful.
Awesome. The question for you, Phillip, are you seeing business bottom lines affected negatively by taking on sustainability challenges and achieving goals?
I knew there'd be a financial question.
You are the accountant.
My response is a typical, well, it depends which way you look at it. What I will say is it's almost a bit too early to call because some of these reporting standards haven't even really enacted fully yet. That's not a fob off of the question, by the way. The reality is it costs you a lot more often to invest in these opportunities than the return you immediately get. So we've got to take definitely by medium term, I'm saying at least 3 years. Because when I think back to 2018, 2019, when some of these initiatives with our colleagues overseas, they're just starting to see the results now. And it probably does take about 3 or 4 years. And that's during a COVID lockdown period that they've had to deal with as well. So I actually would say you're better to look at it as there's going to be a bit of a loss leadership approach to some of these investments. And we can't be going, whoa, I want my dividend yield to be the same as my general portfolio. It just will not work like that. It's got to be an investment for the medium long term, and then we'll see those results come through. And as you talked about, Dom, if you even look at things like Harvard Business Review, etc., you can always get polarising views, right? But what you said was great. It's not mutually exclusive. It's the continuum of where I think you'll find each investor will have their own risk profile and each business will have their own profile, and you're trying to marry those together. It's a long way of saying we don't know for sure yet. There's no question we're starting to see early rays of sunshine.
Because it's still really early.
Totally, yeah. I mean, we've got to be realistic here. None of us up here saying we've got it sorted. We're exactly all at the same level. We're just trying to work through it. It's not going to go away. And the reality is, even with global warming, it's creating points of difference and opportunity for people. So if the temperature on average is higher, what does that mean? How do we do things differently from a manufacture, agriculture, even the people I'm working with in the bee sector? It's a huge issue around, I was talking before about the Manuka seedlings and the way that you build microcosms of planting effectively forests of Manuka. That's an industry in its own right, as well as Manuka oil. And all the temperature changes are having a massive, massive impact, but creating new opportunities.
Yeah. Do you have anything more to add to that, Roger? Yeah. So I'd like to open up the questions to the floor. Does anyone have a question? Yes.
Thank you. Very interesting so far. I would like to know, maybe Roger, you were alluding to that, we have buying power as individuals. We're every day and everything we do, we're making decisions, whether that's bringing the Keep Cup to get our everyday coffee and recycling and not putting batteries in landfill, that all those things. But when it comes to companies, particularly when we're leaning into greenwashing, how can we as everyday people make good decisions of learning about whether this company actually does or whether they actually do what they say they're going to do about their business?
Yeah, it's really tricky, and we've already heard that there are no kind of globally recognised sort of hard and fast standards. There are some schemes. One scheme out there is called B Corp, and you get organisations that are B Corp certified. And to be B Corp certified, you do need to commit to and actually deliver on a bunch of different initiatives related to sustainability. So that's a credible one. But yeah, it's difficult. I think with the online presence of so many companies, you can, if you're prepared to commit the time, invest the time in reading through, you can peel away some of the honesty. And one of the things to look for is people fronting up with sustainability initiatives that they've tried out that haven't worked. So I always feel that's a pretty good sign if people are willing to acknowledge kind of failure. But it's difficult. Some brands are so heavily built on ethics or dimensions of sustainability. I mean, the Body Shop, for example, that they can't afford not to deliver on that. So, but there's a whole grey area of other companies that it's very, very difficult.
Any other questions? Phillip, I've got one for you. You talked about values. How important are values to achieving sustainability goals?
That's right. And you mentioned it as well, just from personal values. It goes without saying, when we talk about strategy development, we often start with the values. I heard a great quote last year, values are important because they've become inconvenient. And effectively that's because they're rubbing us up the wrong way. We all have values in this room, but guess what? They're not identical from person to person. So we just went through that process, and actually I was surprised, shocked a little, but in the positive, when we went through that process with that list I showed you just before. It actually has taken us about 6 or 7 months to land there. And the reason was you have to flush out where people's hearts, minds and souls are at. And it's actually not that easy. Because what I think and what Zane thinks, hopefully we fundamentally head in the same direction. But there's a whole group of other people that have a different perspective on all the things we're talking about. So in short, I'd say way more powerful these days than we ever thought And when we talk about, social impact reporting, ESG, all these key concepts, and they're real things, you can't not have the values piece in there. Because when you talk about ethics and morality, I'll give you a good example just to close. Regardless of what side we think is right or wrong, there's a war going up in the Northern Hemisphere. Which part of our investment portfolios directly or indirectly are related to armaments? Okay, so if you have a real strong view on let's kick butt here, and you look at what's been happening, billions and billions of dollars of economic wealth moving around and being created, where do you start and finish with that? Well, I want to invest sustainably. We're doing armaments. But then, there's a different part. What about the social piece of that? Because you're dealing with a whole lot of ethical, moral issues, which nobody necessarily has the same view on. So if you can, it's a really hard thing to go, it's black and white. It's just not like that.
Yes, Roger.
And just to build on that from a sustainable investment piece, the same problem comes up, and it's pretty acute because you've got a finite number of companies around the world that you can invest in through easily accessible public capital markets. And when you start reducing that number, let's say we're excluding the bad performers because we don't like what they're doing. So we want to get rid of all of the high emitters because we want to address climate change. And then we also want to get rid of all of the, armaments companies, anyone that produces or distributes or derives revenue from tobacco. And then we also care about fair wages. We care about gender diversity. And you start adding on these things, that universe of companies that you can invest in starts to reduce, and that means that the number of companies that you can invest in reduces, and that's not a positive thing from that risk return standpoint, because diversity is your friend when you're an investor. So that's why it is important to reflect on what are my sustainability objectives if I'm going to be investing sustainably. Is it because I care about climate change, or do I care more about social issues? And if so, I'm not just going to invest in this particular investment because they say they're SRI or ESG. I'm actually going to ask the question and say, why are you SRI or why are you ESG? And have the decisions that you have made aligned to my values?
Yeah, just a small build on that. A lot of these issues can be quite kind of polarizing and quite threatening. And one of the things I think is so important is that we recognize that there are trade-offs, and often it's quite nuanced, and we've just heard some really good examples of that. And just keeping that open mind and recognizing that you've got to invest a bit of effort in understanding some of those trade-offs, and making a decision based on your value set, I think is really important. And unfortunately, the way media works these days, it's all about polarizing a discussion and having extreme views and engendering outrage. And, when it comes to the future of civilization, we need to be a little bit more sophisticated than that.
I think ESG is also a really good tool for people choosing their investments as well. When it comes to the likes of KiwiSaver funds, a lot of the fund managers are really vocal about what they do and don't invest in. So when it comes to your own personal views as well, what you value, what you don't want to invest in, like the guys say, you probably don't support child labour. And so if an investment manager says that they also don't invest in child labour, then that is a great screening tool for you to kind of just have this, a tool that you can use that can align to your own values as well. Is there any other questions? I think we'll finish up then. So thank you so much to Phillip and Roger for being our speakers today. You've given us some great insights into a lot of things today. We've got just a few little small gifts. And for those of you that have attended today, thank you so much for coming. And I hope you can leave today a little bit inspired and have a few little key takeaways that you can bring into your own sustainability goals. Thanks for coming today, everyone.
Cheers, Roger.